Ciao e benvenuti al Tavolo Italiano. Today we're going to be talking about conjugating regular Italian verbs in the congiuntivo. A few quick footnotes before we start. This lesson assumes that you know how to conjugate verbs in general. You will also need to have a general understanding of the present tense. And as with all other tenses, there are verbs that are irregular. These will be addressed individually elsewhere. However, you can find more information, exercises, etc. at iltavoloitaliano.com. And like any aspect of the Italian grammar, it takes practice to really gain an understanding of and ability to use what you'll learn here. So, parli italiano. Pronto? Okay then, let's get started. Okay, the congiuntivo, or subjunctive, in this case the present subjunctive, is actually very easy to learn as far as the conjugation patterns. Understanding when to use it can sometimes seem a little difficult for native English speakers. This is because we rarely use it in English anymore. To understand when to use il congiuntivo, or the subjunctive, let's look at what it is. First of all, the subjunctive in itself isn't really a tense from the standpoint of time, like past, present, future. Instead, it's a mood, which explains why we can have the present subjunctive, the imperfect subjunctive, the past subjunctive, etc. What is this mood? It is the use of a verb in a subjective expression. Wow! What does that mean? Well, the website audioenglish.net defines subjective as taking place within the mind and modified by individual bias of a mental act performed entirely within the mind. In other words, if I said he eats meat, there's nothing subjective here, nothing taking place in my mind. It simply means he eats meat. But if I said, I think that he eats meat, now it's subjective, because I am stating that according to a thought in my mind, he eats meat. In this lesson, we're going to be studying how we make subjective expressions, or expressing what is taking place within our minds, and or tainting a statement with our own bias in a subordinate clause, or what we will call a that clause, or for the Italian examples, the che clause. For instance, let's look at our first example. I think that he eats meat. Before I go on, I want to point something out here. This sentence, I think that he eats meat, has two clauses. I think, which is the main clause. That, hence the word that clause or che clause. And then he eats meat, which is the dependent clause. I think is going to be in Italian conjugated in the present tense, but that's what's causing the whole thing to go into a subjective mode. Therefore, the eats meat, as you're going to see in a few seconds here, is going to be what has to be conjugated in the subjunctive or the congiuntivo. So moving on, in Italian, there is a completely different conjugation system or pattern for verbs that are in the dependent clause, in the dependent that or che clauses. Verbs that are tainted by the bias expressed by another verb that is subjective in nature. In this case, the verb to eat, as I pointed out, or as used in this sentence, eats. So let's take a look at this in Italian. Penso che lui mangi la carne. You will notice that lui mangi isn't how we would conjugate mangiare for lui in the present tense. That is because we have to use the present subjunctive tense as it is no longer just a statement of fact, but instead now an expression of an opinion, a subjective expression. A few other examples could be: he wants to speak to me tomorrow. Okay, before we go on, he wants, this is the primary clause or the main clause, or excuse me, he wants me to speak tomorrow. Okay, he wants, main clause, me to speak tomorrow, dependent clause. He wants is taking place in his mind. It's subjective. For me to speak tomorrow is tainted by he wants. Hence it is now in the congiuntivo. Vuole, or he wants, che io parli domani. Notice io parli is not how we would normally conjugate parlare per io in the present tense, because now it's in a present congiuntivo, or the present subjunctive tense, as it is tainted by vuole. He wants me to speak tomorrow. Vuole che io parli domani. I hope that they arrive today. Spero che arrivino oggi. Oggi. Okay, once again, arrive, the verb, is in the congiuntivo because it's tainted by the verb I hope, another subjective expression of a verb, something that's happening in the mind. How about I believe that we are right? Credo che abbiamo ragione. Now here, abbiamo, or the noi person for the verb avere, happens to be conjugated exactly the way it is in the present tense, but it's still congiuntivo, or subjunctive, present subjunctive in this case. So the statement, I believe that we are right, is once again has to be in a subjunctive tense, because I believe is a subjective statement. So when the main clause is a subjective statement, then the dependent clause has to be conjugated in the congiuntivo. Okay, now it's important to note in this lesson that we are only addressing the present subjunctive, or congiuntivo, and only when we have to because of a that or que clause. We will address the other congiuntivo or subjunctive tenses and other instances that dictate their use in other lessons. Remember, the goal, as always, is to try to get a good grasp, on a little information instead of a hazy understanding about a lot of information. There is one other aspect of the present subjunctive that we would like to address. That is when the subject is the same in both the main and the dependent clauses, such as in the following sentence, I believe that I understand, then we treat it differently. Remember, the sentences that we were talking about up until this point might have been, I think that he eats meat. So the subject here in the previous sentences would have been I think that, okay, so we have our main clause, and then he eats meat, a different subject, I and he. But in this sentence, notice I believe that I understand. The subject is the same in both clauses. In this case, we simply follow the verb in the main clause that is conjugated in the present tense, I believe, which would be credo, by the preposition di in the infinitive form of the verb in the dependent clause. You do that as follows. Credo di capire. I believe that I understand. So, in the congiuntivo, when both subjects are the same person, then the way you conjugate the congiuntivo is simply di and the infinitive verb. Facile, no? As long as you remember to do it that way. A few other examples are vogliono di venire. They want to come. Speri di vincere. You hope to win. In both cases, the subject is the same, both in the main and the dependent clauses. Okay, now let's take a look at how to actually conjugate in the present subjunctive, or congiuntivo. To conjugate the regular a or e verbs in the congiuntivo, you simply take que plus the optional subject pronoun. Now I want to point something out here. Oftentimes in the conjuntivos you're going to see the conjugation is the same for io, tu, and lui, le. So oftentimes they'll use io, tu, or lui, le to be clear as far as what the subject is, more so than in the regular present tense. Not always, because context can still define that, but it's not unusual. So we have que plus the optional subject pronoun plus the verb conjugated in the conjuntivo equals the conjugated verb. Example: que, or that, plus noi, optional subject pronoun, plus parare, to speak, minus are equals parlo, plus iamo, ending for we speak, equals che noi parliamo, that we speak. So parlare conjugated in the congiuntivo presente is che io parli, that I speak. Che tu parli, that you speak. Che lui le parli, that he or she speaks. Che noi parliamo, that we speak. Che voi parliate, that y'all speak. Che loro parlino, that they speak. Okay, you'll notice here that the first three persons for the regular a, or a or e verbs are all the same as what we would normally do for the second person in the present tense, where you drop the infinitive ending and you add e. Noi is exactly the same. Voi instead of ate is iate, and loro instead of hanno is ino. So we have che io parli, che you parli, che you parli. Che io parli, che tu parli, che lui le parli, scusi. And then che noi parliamo, che voi parliate, and che loro parlino. Que to conjugate regular e or e verbs in the congiuntivo. Once again, it's que, the optional subject pronoun, and the verb conjugated in the congiuntivo. Or que plus noi, optional subject pronoun, plus vedere, or vedere, to see, minus ere, equals ved, plus iamo, ending for we, che noi vediamo, that we see. Vedere, conjugated in the congiuntivo, is che io veda, that I see. Che tu veda, that you see. Che lui le veda, that he or she sees. Che noi vediamo, that we see. Che voi vediate, that y'all see. And che loro vedono, that they see. Now this time, instead of the second person singular for the first three, or the second, same conjugation as the second person singular in the present tense, we add the letter a, or a, to it. So it's veda, veda, veda. The next two are done the same as the a or e's, vediamo, vediate, and the last one, though, is vedano, instead of like for the a or e where we saw it was vedino. Parlino, scusi. So just like how, with the way to remember this that helped me was in the loro form, this letter right here, a, correlates with what's going on with io, tu, lui, le, a. Okay? Whereas remember, for instance, for the a or e's, it would be che io parli, tu parli, lui, le parli. Then when you get to loro, parlino. Here we have veda, 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 vedano. So once again, we have che io veda, che tu veda, che lui, le veda, che noi vediamo, che voi vediate, and che loro vedono. And finally, let's look at the I or E verbs in the congiuntivo. These are going to be basically the same as the E or E. We have noi, optional subject pronoun, sentire minus ire equals sent, plus iamo, ending for we here. che noi sentiamo, that we hear. So hence, sentire is going to be che io senta, che tu senta, lui lei senta, sentiamo, sentiate, sentano. Exactly the same as the ERE endings. Facile, no? Easy. Okay, now, the only other thing I want to point out is if the verb is what we call an ist verb of a regular IRE, then for the first, second, and third person singular and the third person plural, we still add the ist in between the infinitive root and the congiuntival ending. Therefore, for instance, if this was finire, it would be che io finisca, che tu finisca, che lui lei finisca, then che noi finiamo, che voi finiate, e che loro finiscano. Okay, so we still have to follow the ist rules for the ist verbs. All right, so we've talked about when we have to use the subjunctive tense, and we've talked about how to conjugate a verb in the subjunctive tense. Now let's see if we can apply a little of what we have learned. Okay, see if you can translate the following into Italian before the answer appears. I'll give you a few seconds. Here we go. In English, the sentence is, I think that he lies. What would that be in Italian? I think that he lies. Okay. Penso che lui menta. Penso che lui menta. So we have penso, regular present tense for I think, che lui menta. We need the subjunctive here because it's I think that he lies. This is tainted by the subjective statement I think. So penso che lui menta. Menta comes from mentire, of course, to lie. So the first three people, io, tu, and lui, lei, are all going to be menta. Right, let's try the next one. They want me to sing. Okay, in Italian, vogliono che io canti. Vogliono che io canti. Vogliono, the standard present tense for they want. Che io canti. We have to use the subjunctive, or the congiuntivo, because over here we have a subjective statement. Vogliono, they want. It's happening in their mind. So this is tainted, so it has to be in the subjunctive or the congiuntivo. Che io canti. Canti is the congiuntivo for cantare. Remember, A-R-E verbs, the first three persons, io, tu, lui, lei, are all conjugated with an E. So cantare minus are plus E is canti. Vogliono che io canti. We hope that you win. Speriamo che tu vinca. Speriamo che tu vinca. Speriamo, the regular present tense for we hope. That's our subjective statement, in the main clause. Che tu vinca. Vincere. Remember, A-R-A or E-R-E verbs. The first three persons, io, tu, lui, lei, are all with a. And so we have che tu vinca, the congiuntivo of vincere. Because speriamo, it's taking place in the mind. We hope that you win. So vincere has to be in the congiuntivo. Okay, number 4. Do you believe you know the truth? Okay, in Italiano, credi di sapere la verità? Okay, this one was a little bit different because this one has the same subject pronoun in both clauses. Do you believe you know the truth, or do you believe that you know the truth? So do you believe being the main clause or the subjective statement? Do you believe? Is it happening in your mind? You know the truth. Is now required to be in the congiuntivo because it's tainted by do you believe? Do you believe? You know the truth. But we have you and you. And remember, when we have the same subject in both clauses, then we follow the first one, the main clause, or the subjective verb, credi, with di, and then the infinitive of the verb in the dependent clause. So, credi di sapere la verità. Credi di sapere la verità. Do you believe, credi, di sapere, that you know, la verità, the truth. So remember that one. When you have both subjects are the same, it's simple. Conjugate the first verb or the subjective verb in the present tense. The second one is simply di in the infinitive form. Okay, and the last one. I doubt that they dance well. Dubito che loro ballino bene. Dubito che loro ballino bene. Okay, once again, dubito, the main clause, I doubt. Very subjective term. It's happening in my mind. I doubt that loro ballino bene has to be conjugated, parare there, in the congiuntivo, because it's I doubt that they dance well. So are you kind of getting the gist of it? How the main clause, or the first use of the verb in these instances, and the main clause taint the second one. The main clause is what's actually happening in my mind about what I'm saying in the dependent clause. So in this case, dubito, I doubt, that they dance. They dance is what I'm doubting. I'm tainting it, okay? So dubito che loro ballino bene. And ballino, obviously, is the congiuntivo conjugation for loro. Okay, there we have it. Grazie mille per aver studiato con noi. Thank you very much for having studied with us. A lot of people find the congiuntivo very difficult. It really isn't that bad. I would encourage you to go over this lesson a few times. Memorize the conjugation patterns so that you'll be able to conjugate any regular verb in the present subjunctive or the congiuntivo presente. And then just remember, when you have a K clause like that or a that clause, and the first verb is subjective, okay? And I want, I hope, I doubt, I think, I believe, etc. And it taints that second verb. That second verb has to be conjugated in the subjunctive or the congiuntivo. In this case, the verbs are in the present tense on both sides of the K. And that's all we're dealing with here. We will deal with the past tense in future lessons. So I hope that this helps you with the subjunctive tense, the congiuntivo. And I hope that you choose to continue on, keep studying with us. Remember, there's a lot of other information on this subject and other subjects, all at tavoloitaliano.com, always for free. So, grazie mille, ciao, e parli italiano.